FAQ, thank you for the conversation. Leslie, thank you for your attention and for your questions. Notes and comments. Almost all demographers agree the members of Generation Alpha are differently wired. Leslie's comments: differently wired is passive voice that beneficially hides, or masquerades the doer, I.e. Who or what caused the different wiring? If we turn it back into active voice, it is clear that the active agent was the mother or the father, and maybe some other significant members in the baby's human environment. The gadget cannot give itself into the baby's hand, although physically/psychologically the too early use of the gadget did the harm. Understanding Generation Alpha / Mark McCrindle and Ashley Fell 2020 / McCrindle Research Thai Ltd Australia P3. If organizations want to not only exist in a decade's time, but thrive and flourish, then understanding Generation Alpha and the future they will be shaped in, and contribute to, is imperative. Leslie's comments: I couldn't agree more. Organizations will be happy to employ members of the Alpha generation if they are better than the average, but I just cannot imagine that organizations would turn a blind eye and be happy to employ members of the Alpha generation with serious problems, simply because they belong to the Alpha generation. P4, they are the children of the Millennial SPE. 1980 to 1994. They will be parents to Generation Gamma B. 2040 to 2054. Leslie's comments: parenting was drastically modified for the millennials. Will it be totally in the hand of gadgets for the Alpha generation, I wonder? P6, Generation Alpha began being born in the year 2010, the same year the first iPad was released and Instagram launched. Leslie's comments: it is an interesting coincidence, but the first iPad was not invented, and then released for the Alpha generation, and Instagram was not launched for the Alpha generation, either. They were given to the Alpha generation, very often too early to do anything meaningful with them. P6, these young people have access to more technology, information, and external influencers than any generation before them. Leslie's comments: congratulations for the millennials for letting the Alpha generation have access to more technology, information, and external influences than any generation before them. Based on this precious possession, have the Alpha generation learned the mother tongue, by the age of 3, better than, or at least as well as, any generation before them? Have they learned the world, through the mother tongue, better than, or at least as well as, any generation before them? Have they learned communication and socialization skills better than, or at least as well as, any generation before them? Have they learned reading and doing body language better than, or at least as well as, any generation before them? Have they learned empathy better than, or at least as well as, any generation before them? P8, Generation Alpha is part of an unintentional global experiment where screens are placed in front of them from the youngest age as pacifiers, entertainers, and educational aids. Leslie's comments: is there anybody who seriously thinks that the gadget is the best pacifier? Aren't humans, E.G. Mother, better pacifiers? The gadget may act more as a pacifier for the too tired or bored mother who is seeking some time to be alone and ride her own hobby, horse. Is the gadget the best entertainer? Aren't members of the human environment better entertainers? Is the gadget, in its present form, the best educational aid? Can't humans help comprehension, learning, retention, and use better than any gadget? By the way, it feels like in vivo experimentation with babies and children, who cannot talk back to adults, and especially not to parents. P8, this great screen age which we are all living in has bigger impacts on the generation exposed to such screen saturation during their formative years. Leslie's comments: the flat screen was not invented, developed, and produced for the Alpha generation. It is first abused, when it does harm, later it is misused, when it has neither an objective, nor a goal, nor an aim, and much later it is used with an aim and a purpose. P8, from shorter attention spans to the gamification of education, from increased digital literacy to impaired social formation, these times impact us all but transform those in their formative years. Leslie's comments, their attention span is really short. I know it because I teach quite a few Alpha generation students. I also know that the span can be made longer by creating a group, by using dialogues instead of monologues, by getting rid of fright and anger in the class, and by using pedagogy as a helping profession. Gamification is fine, but we also have to work on its twin brother when we fill the games with some educational content, thus giving them aims. To that end, it may be necessary to educate the game makers first. Increasing digital literacy is absolutely necessary, not only for the Alpha generation but also for earlier generations, as well. The impaired social formation can best be healed by the formation of warm, welcoming, and accepting groups. To that end, teacher training curricula must contain a deeper insight into humanistic psychology and the person-centered approach. The Y generation was impacted by technology, but they were adults and educated by the time it hit them. The Z generation is a precursor and prefiguration of the Alpha generation. As such, it shows many of the symptoms the Alpha generation does, e.g. Memorization as a habit has considerably gone back for some of them, and many of them are dependent on using gadgets. The Alpha generation, on the other hand, was impacted by technology in their formative years, almost all before their education, and many of them even before learning their mother tongue. P8. It is almost impossible to pry Generation Alpha away from their devices, which have been permanent in their lives from the day they were born. Leslie's comments, it is a massive dose of euphemism. Instead of trying to pry the Alpha generation away from their devices, they shouldn't have introduced the devices to them too early and without a good reason for the contact. The devices were not invented for newborn babies. What can a baby do with them? Nothing, at least nothing meaningful. I wonder why parents feel obliged to ruin their beautiful babies and children? Isn't this a question of lack of education? Would it help if we educated the adults? P8. Their exposure to technology during their formative years will have a great impact on their lives. Leslie's comments, do you mean to say that they learn some positive and useful skills, but they don't usually learn their mother tongue well enough for successful communication and for their further studies? They have relatively good short-term memory, but they have given up the habit of long-term memorization. They are quite bad at mental arithmetic. They have difficulties in communication and socialization, they have difficulties in learning empathy, and it may pose problems in team building, in management, and in joining the teaching profession. P8. They have been using the devices from before they could talk, so we are yet to see the impacts of their interaction with screens. Leslie's comments, if they have been using the devices from before they could talk, they have done it instead of learning the mother tongue. Learning the mother tongue is normally 24/7 for 3 years. If you take time away from this, it will be at the expense of learning the mother tongue. The impacts of their interaction with the screen will also depend on the language. P8. There will certainly be some positives, but like any other generation would, it will provide Generation Alpha with some unique challenges. Leslie's comments, the positive elements may come as a result of positive synergy between the human environment, including the mother, and technology. The negative challenges may come from the negative synergy between the human environment and technology. P12. A shift in educational engagement is occurring for Generation Alpha, with schools switching from structural and auditory learning to engaging, visual, multimodal and hands-on methods of educating this emerging generation. Leslie's comments, this is a point where I have serious doubts. Is this shift in educational engagement really occurring? Maybe only in Australia? I'm only asking because there is no sign of this shift in Europe and some other continents. Why is there such a shift? Is the Alpha generation the first where the rules and laws of accommodation and assimilation don't apply? If the Alpha generation hasn't learned something, i.e. if the preceding generation failed in teaching the Alpha generation something, then we declare the missing content unnecessary? Doesn't even a smaller shift start by proving that the shift is necessary? Forward, taking, and doable? Isn't the next step training the trainers? Isn't the step after that choosing the teachers, to be by a different criteria that match the imagined shift? Doesn't the revised teaching start with a pilot phase, where you can finalize the directions and make the aims more precise? Isn't it necessary to give training, or further training to the old foxes, who have been in the field for decades and cannot, and doesn't want to, change overnight? Is it sure that the problem is with the structural and auditory learning? We need to know that before we throw them out. Can the visual stand alone and still make sense? If the shift is towards multimodal, what will the visual combine with to make it multimodal? Smell, or taste, or maybe the tactile? This last point on page 12 is a big question mark, a series of unproved hypotheses, for almost all subjects students learn and teachers teach. There is one subject, however, for which it is all false, lunatic, and it will never work, and it is language learning. Language is necessarily speech-based, and as such it is possible for every human being. It is not true for the written language, which is not possible for everyone. Just think of the more than 25% functional illiterates, and this figure is growing. Understanding Generation Alpha /Amrit Kumar Jha June 2020 /Lalit Narayan Mithila University India. P1. Considering the present and the future to reckon, certain psychological traits of Generation Alpha along with their problems and vulnerabilities have been considered. The paper envisages a promising future for the Generation Alpha, but with caveats, requiring timely interventions. Leslie's comments: the psychological traits are definitely there for Generation Alpha, but the timely interventions seem to be missing. P4. Recently, it was found that by the age of 2 they master touchscreen and easily navigate through various apps on smartphones. Leslie's comments: what can a 2-year-old child do with a touchscreen besides touching it? What does a 2-year-old child understand from the various apps they can operate so successfully? Don't they do all these instead of learning the mother tongue? Don't the parents buy the time for using their own gadgets by giving a gadget to the baby and then a child? P4. Psychoanalysts and developmental psychologists with the likes of Bowlby, Freud, and Piaget have underscored the prominence of the early days of life for a secure attachment, cognitive and social development leading to a strong, stable, and adaptive personality in future. Leslie's comments: 21st century parents either never knew, or have forgotten what psychiatrists and developmental psychologists knew 100 years ago. The child needs a full-time, attentive mother and a caring father. If the baby and later the child get in touch with the gadget will take away the mother and/or the father for at least part of the necessary 24/7/3 years period, and it is difficult/borderline impossible to compensate for the loss and heal the wounds. We know it from generation researchers what the child does with the gadget. We also know it from psychiatrists and educational psychologists what the gadget does with the child. The common denominator between the two is: do not let the baby and the child get in touch with the gadget before they are ready for it, i.e. before it has an objective, a goal, and an aim. In other words, give the gadget to the child when their brain can work on the gadget. It means development. Any time before that, the gadget will work on their brain, and it is deterioration. P4. Freud, 1923, stresses upon the indispensable role of childhood and parenting for a stronger ego to emerge, free from anxieties, vulnerabilities, and conflicts. P6. For Gen Alpha, vulnerabilities emerging out of digital technologies are second to none. From psychological and physiological impact including cognition, sleep, and impaired social and emotional well-being to cyber threats and addiction, the list is ever growing. Leslie's comments: the anxieties, vulnerabilities, cyber threats, and conflicts are all there, and parents must be informed that all these are the result of their unthinking, mean behavior. As a teacher who teaches the Alpha Gen, I experience it as a shrinking concentration span, and the shrinking must be stopped and reversed. I can also see that the capacity to memorize is there, but the willingness to memorize is more and more missing. It is bad because we can associate only to whatever is in the mind already. I also experience that most of the time, they learn into the short-term memory. It is bad because in higher school, at university, and in most professions, we need a longer-term memory than the short-term memory allows. The lack of memorization poses a lot of problems in language learning since we have to remember everything we have learned ever since the first lesson up till the present page. We can also explain new grammar successfully on top of well-practiced vocabulary, and demonstrate new vocabulary on top of consolidated grammar. In other words, we must have the Dolch words that give the structure of the language a second nature to be able to fill up the structure with lexical words that give the meaning, and the situation is exactly the same with natural collocations without which we cannot understand native speakers. My Alpha Gen students are very weak in mental arithmetic and have to face problems earlier generations hardly ever met. As an example, they have problems in recognizing the relationship between elements, and cannot continue the series with two more elements like 100, 80, 60, 40, 20, or 17, 20, 6, 30, 5, 40, 4, 50, 3. It is not really about the multiplication table that many schools stopped teaching, it is more about preparing the brain to cause and effect relationships, and action, and future result. Many members of the Alpha Gen haven't learned the mother tongue well enough in the first 3 years of their life to be able to learn empathy up till 7 and beyond. Either the mother was too busy dealing with her own gadget, dependency, or the family was not empathic enough. You can only learn empathy, and come out of your inborn egotism, in an empathic environment. Without empathy, it is almost impossible to build a warm, supportive, accepting environment, or a caring and sharing group. Without these, positive synergy, real team work, and really helping relationships are impossible. For many Alpha Gen students, the social skills are sadly missing, and for less trained teachers it changes the teaching profession, with drastic negative changes in the results. Teaching a group of 30 students, or even 3 gangs of 10 members each, is a great deal more effective than teaching 30 individuals in the same container. Here, everything depends on vertical learning, i.e. learning from the teacher, and horizontal learning, i.e. learning from mates, or diagonal learning, i.e. learning from top of the class who are often beyond the requirements of the curriculum, is almost totally out. A very special new phenomenon is that members of the Alpha Gen have problems with greeting. They don't greet the teacher, their mates, their parents, or their siblings. I've heard it from many generation researchers that this is the new normal and everybody has to live with it from now on. They give different explanations for why it is like that and why it is acceptable, but this is bullshit asterisk. Greeting is a norm in civilization and giving up greeting is giving up being civilized. Greeting is part of learning the mother tongue, and the real reason why members of the Alpha Gen don't greet is that they didn't learn it as part of second nature. Greeting is the start of making contact with another human being. Not greeting is a signal that we don't want to start a contact with the other human being, or they want to go on as if they had started. Can you imagine any cooperation or team work between persons who don't even greet each other? Can you imagine any negotiation between parties who don't greet each other? Can you imagine a negotiation for a meaning, to understand each other better, without greeting and small talk? Well, I can't, and students cannot come into my class without greeting me, and more importantly, greeting each other. If the parents didn't teach them, it is still not too late. Learn it in class. Researchers of generations are right in a very high number of things, but they are wrong in a few. Among them is the fiction that earlier generation will give up their normals for the new normals of the Alpha Gen. Members of the Alpha Gen will not feel at home and won't be successful in schools with long and strong traditions, at university or in high-quality workplaces without learning to accommodate and assimilate. A very similar topic is time. They often cannot make the difference between my time, which is precious, your time, which is, believe it or not, equally precious, and our time, which is especially precious. With some pain, they can learn this too, and realize that quality contacts don't tolerate their loose relationship with time. Being on time is part of respecting the other, and without mutual respect, cooperation is impossible, and living together is painful. P6. Such has been the widespread use of online gaming that American Psychiatric Association and World Health Organization have classified them as disorder, namely Internet gaming disorder and gaming disorder. Leslie's comments: gaming disorder is not new, it has hundreds or thousands of years of history, but Internet gaming disorder is only as old as the Internet. It is similar to alcohol, or drug, dependency, and logical reasoning doesn't provide any help against it. In my English classes, it occurs mostly to boys, and rarely to girls, who don't find enough adrenaline, i.e. success or manageable challenge in their education. Boredom and loneliness are also important factors. Very often, negligent parents and powerful influencers are behind the scene at the start. The solution needs a combined effort from parents, teachers, and often psychologists, and of course from the victim. P6. In one of our studies, we have found that an adolescent spent an average of 2 hours on mobile gaming with sheer consequences on anger management and socialization, leading to loneliness and aggressiveness upon withdrawal. Leslie's comments: anger management problems are not new. In the early 80s many teenagers smashed their, or the school's, Commodore 64 into pieces, simply because the machine, and the program didn't let them win simplistic, almost idiotic tennis game. Nowadays, smashing the hardware is more costly, but it rarely stops the aggressor. Withdrawal is a real problem and it can reduce the gamer a zombie. It means that being physically there doesn't mean that they can take part in any activity. P6. Physiologically and psychologically, changes in brain plasticity, or neural wiring, cognition, sleep disturbances, and obesity, constitutes the future problematic trend for Gen Alpha. Neuronal changes due to games and internet use in children are uniquely sensitive to neural plasticity. Leslie's comments: all these are sensed by physicians and psychologists and I don't really know what they can do to help the kids or teenagers. As a teacher of members of the Alpha Gen, do not sense the changes in neural wiring or neural plasticity. What I sense is that they are almost always late for class, they are so tired as if they were coming to class after 2 shifts of hard physical work, their attention is short and not deep enough to understand ideas of medium difficulty, they are reluctant to repeat things as a means of memorization, they do nothing, i.e. sabotage pair, work. They practically don't do their jobs at home in autonomous learning between lessons, and they never do homework. P6. It delays the development of microstructures in the cortical brain regions, and reduction in brain tissue density, leading to deficits in cognition. Leslie's comments: this is again the Sisyphean and psychologists' territory. What I, as a teacher, sense is that they are quite reluctant to practice anything, if they don't understand it. That's why, saying we shouldn't practice nonsense, and if they understand it, that's why, saying it is unnecessary to repeat something we already understand. They don't recognize that practice helps the better understanding of half-understood things. They don't recognize it either that their understanding, and with it their knowledge, is borrowed, i.e. They only know it and understand it in the classroom and in the presence of the teacher and the mates, and there is nothing left of them by the time they get home. P7. Sleep carries a major survival value for mankind, but, marred with casual attitude toward sleep followed by technology use at night. The time meant for sleep is being traded off with technology use at night, time by texting, chatting, playing games and watching movies. Leslie's comments: feeling sleepy in the classroom doesn't mean that they want to go home to sleep. It means that they want to leave the classroom to continue texting, chatting, playing games and watching movies. FAQ: I have heard that the language of texting is almost the same as Pidgin English. Leslie: almost but not quite. Texting is more like Gullah language. FAQ, what is the difference? Leslie, Pidgin English was, and still is, a language both parties understand. Gullah, on the other hand, is a language that is created by one side who doesn't bother with the understanding by the other side. Gullah language created a new grammar simply because they were quite reluctant to learn the academically correct grammar of English. Most of the texting I have seen and heard is academically incorrect. I understand what they want to say, but what they do say is incorrect. I wonder how members of the Alpha Gen would fit into a serious school, or graduate at a university with texting. P7, using such sleep eroding devices leads to more screen time, further elongating the exposure to blue light emitting diodes, leading to less production of melatonin hormone, or sleep-producing hormone, and disrupting sleep-wake cycle. Leslie's comments, it is true for all gadgets that use a color screen. It doesn't mean that the screen is blue. It can be almost any color because the colors are produced by blending blue, red, and green. The blue is there in almost all colors. If sleep is lost, the quality of wake time is very low and the time spent with learning is wasted. P7, in a recent survey, it was found that on average a child spent approximately 7 to 8 hours on mobile, with the maximum time devoted to the internet, social media, gaming and texting. They have been lured to believe that every problem has solution courtesy technology and is available round the clock, much more than the availability of their caregivers. Technology has overpowered humans, impairing social and emotional skills, affecting relationships, which will become fatal as Gen Alpha grows up. Leslie's comments, can a child spend 7 to 8 hours a day devoted to the internet without the consent of their caregivers? Isn't that time missing from learning, doing sports, talking to parents and the family, playing outside, mixing with other kids, and riding their hobby, horses? What will happen to the missing social and emotional skills? Can the internet replace healthy relationships? P7 to 8, their immediate predecessors, Generation Z, was found to be the most vulnerable age group for suicide in the most youthful nation in the world, India. Who further cautioned that suicide accounts for the second most leading cause for youths. Such worrying trends of their elders, who were either unknown to or partially exposed to the technology in their initial years of life, set a wrong precedent for Gen Alpha. Leslie's comments, these figures are true for India and I don't know enough about India to comment on these figures. P8, the change in family structure, child rearing practices, and nature of the job in terms of helicopter parenting, small and nuclear family, dual career family, and work from home put an excessive toll on the parents too. Theories by Bowlby, 1973, and Freud, 1923, had explicitly emphasized the importance of healthy parenting in the first 2 years of life. Leslie's comments, there are several questions that come up here. Are mothers of members of the Alpha Gen fully prepared to bring up a child? Do they know that it is a full-time job with very little room for carelessness, and zero room for gadget dependency? Do they know that they are full-time teachers of the mother tongue 24/7/ for 3 years, and for an additional 4 years to learn such extras as body, language, ethical and moral codes, and social skills? Do they know that they must give positive examples in emotional intelligence, social intelligence, interpersonal intelligence, and natural intelligence? P8, however, the present pattern of parenting appears to be polarized with excessive love, attention, and continuous monitoring of the child on one hand and taking the help of babysitters/maids/foster caregivers during the time when they are out on the other. Leslie's comments, what is the definition of love here, I wonder? Is it giving everything the child wants? Is it feeding and satisfying their wants, rather than serving their needs? True love cannot be clever, and it cannot be excessive. Are attention and continuous monitoring synonyms? Will the child learn to make decisions for themselves if they are continuously monitored? If the child is not alone, gets shelter, food, drink and cleaning, is it necessarily care? A systematic literature review of education for Generation Alpha / Institute on Family and Neighborhood Life, Clemson University, Clemson, United States and Department of Psychology, Czech University of Life Sciences Prague, Czech Republic /2024 P1, Generation Alpha are the first to grow up immersed in digital technology and presumed to be wired differently than previous generations. Leslie's comments, again the passive voice are immersed in digital technology, and are differently wired that successfully hides who immersed them in digital technology, and what wired them differently. The passive voice dismisses the responsibility from these actions. The researchers don't want to make it very clear that the parents, and other significant members of the baby or child's human environment, thinking that the baby or child misses something important if they don't, immersed them in digital technology, and the digital technology, coming too early and aimlessly, wired their brain differently. P1. This systematic review synthesizes the research literature on what has been learned so far and broadly answers the following question: what is happening in the education and training of Generation Alpha? Leslie's comments, the systematic research is perfect and full, but the research literature is incomplete. It sadly misses teachers' comments on the teachability and development of members of the Alpha Gen. Without these comments, the question what is happening in the education and training of Generation Alpha is still crying for an answer. Were the researchers not interested in teachers' comments, or do these comments simply not exist? P1. The studies were sorted into 4 major categories: 1. The role of teachers, 2. The role of new approaches to education, 3. The role of teaching tools, and 4. The role of blended/online learning. Leslie's comments, I have some questions about these 4. 1. Are the teachers trained and ready to teach the Alpha Gen? They have not been trained and they have not been very successful in teaching the LD students. Can they be successful in teaching the Alpha Gen? 2. Are teachers trained in the new approaches to education? Do the new approaches concentrate on the learning differences? Have they managed to include the excluded student? Do these new approaches focus on the habit of memorization and bringing back the habit of memorization if it is lost? Do these new approaches focus on learning into the long-term memory? Do these new approaches focus on the quality of the mother tongue we have learned? Do these new approaches focus on making up for the loss if something is missing in the mother tongue? 3. The role of teaching tools raises 2 questions. What is teaching? What is a tool? Is information giving teaching? Are all these tools necessarily related to teaching? Can we learn without tools? Can we use these tools without learning? 4. Are teachers trained in blended teaching? Is blended learning possible without blended teaching? What do we blend in blended teaching? What do students blend in blended learning? P1. Despite frequent use of the term Generation Alpha in research literature, relatively few studies report generational differences that reveal how children of this generation are characteristically different from previous generations. Leslie's comments, I don't think that you can feel and understand the differences between different generations just by watching statistics about generations. You have to teach them to see how differently they learn. I have been teaching members of all generations of the 20th century from my mother, born in 1914, to hundreds of X and Y generations, and then students of the Z and Alpha generations, and I have massive experiences about their teachability and learning habits. P1. There is simply a strong assumption that Generation Alpha is different. The major concern is that the use of technology by Generation Alpha has decreased opportunities for social, emotional development and increased mental health problems. Leslie's comments, whatever is an assumption for the generation researchers about the Generation Alpha, it is joy or bitterness, or anything in between, for teachers. I feel a marked difference in their social, emotional development, and their parents feel their increased mental health problems. P1. Here are digital educational tools and online strategies being developed and tested, but none of them emerged to be dominant. Leslie's comments, what Alpha Gen students generally need is not more, and better tools, but more and better human contact, and better and more trained teacher intervention. P1. Generation Alpha has received a lot of attention by scholars seeking to understand how current advances in technology might impact their learning. The underlying assumptions are that Generation Alpha students differ qualitatively from students from other generations and that there should be corresponding changes to education based on these differences. To date, these assumptions have not been systematically examined, though there have been reviews in related areas. Leslie's comments: if you go to any primary school today, all the students there are what generation researchers call Alpha generation. If you look and listen carefully, you will find that they read and write differently, listen and speak differently, socialize differently, use mental arithmetic differently, do homework and autonomous jobs differently, and relate to their teachers, the school, and learning differently from students who belong to their parents' or grandparents' generation. Their listening and speaking is different because of the shorter concentration span, their reading and writing is different because of their different attitude to books, and anything that is printed. The group's social structure is different because there are more and more lonely and bored members, and more students with game dependency in it. They use mental arithmetic differently because their school and teachers in those schools didn't feel it necessary to teach the multiplication table. To them, their attitude to do homework is different because they don't practice different items and topics enough to be able to do it alone. Their relationship with their school, teachers, and learning are different because of all of the above. P1. Accordingly, a systematic review of education literature is necessary to discover whether and how Generation Alpha should be considered by educators. The significance of this review is to guide future educational efforts designed to target specific cohorts like Generation Alpha. Leslie's comments: I agree, it is absolutely necessary. There is, however, one serious obstacle in seeing a clearer picture, and it is the fact that researchers and university staff write papers but they don't teach in elementary schools, and elementary school teachers teach the Alpha Gen but they don't write papers, and that is why the accumulated knowledge is mainly theoretical, with little direct, practical experience. Here is one example from TEFL: teaching English as a foreign language. Universities seriously teach Krashen's theories, among them the language acquisition theory. It is important, it is a failure or filter, although language acquisition is hardly possible in a TEFL class, where comprehension most often comes through translation, and students are not immersed in the target language. Another, more general, example is the treatment of dyslexic, dysgraphic, and dyscalculic students. Schools and teachers in those schools discriminate them, ridicule them, and stigmatize them mistakenly. In writing and reading classes, although dyslexia, dysgraphia, and dyscalculia don't exist in speech cultures, and it would be very easy to empower these students in speech-based classes if these classes existed. Universities don't usually act as a go-between to save these students from discrimination and stigmatization. I know that something very similar is happening nowadays with difficult cases of the Alpha Gen. P1. The term generation can be used to classify people based on their year of birth, age, location, similar values, and / or important events, and usually span about 20 years. Leslie's comments: for the Alpha Gen, the base of classification is almost always the date of birth. They don't usually base their classification based on traits, because these come to the surface through teaching and learning, and generation researchers don't usually teach these students. P2. Generation Alpha and those immediately preceding generations could all be understood to be digital generations, with the only difference being the quantity and quality of digital opportunities that were available when growing up. Leslie's comments: this only difference is, I find, very big, since the Y and Z generations had the digital input after they had learned the mother tongue, while the Alpha generation had it instead of learning it really well. P2. All future generations will be considered true digital natives, with Generation Alpha simply being the first to be so immersed in digital technology. Leslie's comments: we shouldn't imagine this total immersion as something altogether positive. Some of the negative effects are obvious now, but the whole picture will only be clear if / when the members of the Alpha Gen go to university. P2. members of Generation Alpha are unlikely to carry a wallet or take a written test. Leslie's comments, the conclusion about written test is wrong. Universities are not famous for changing teaching styles rapidly, and especially not for the students' better comfort. Always students have to accommodate and assimilate. Having or not having written tests don't qualify education. Many tests assess the knowledge teachers don't teach, and equally often they assess the stress they themselves cause. P2, despite their large numbers, research on characteristics of Generation Alpha is limited. The assumption that Generation Alpha is qualitatively different than Generation Z is largely untested, and sometimes disrupted. There are very few direct comparisons between generations measuring the nature and extent of digital fluency or competence. Leslie's comments, the differences are not felt in the statistical averages, you can find them in the individuals. Generation researchers deal with and create the statistics, and teachers feel the differences in their teaching. P2, perhaps the only certainty is that for this generation, the everyday role of digital devices is not perceived as tool or instrument to augment life, but as a normative and necessary means to interact with the world. This chief characteristic has important developmental implications, most notably in the construction of identity and social, emotional learning. Still, there are some research findings that suggest that Generation Alpha can be distinguished from previous generations. Leslie's comments, it is the second step in which the digital devices are already organic parts of their life. In the first step, before the devices were introduced, was when they lived a full and happy life without the devices. The time of introducing the devices is crucial. If they know the mother tongue, and they have learned as much of the world as possible, the introduction of the devices adds to the quality of life. The device is a means to an end, and the end is life itself. There are no withdrawal symptoms here, or the withdrawal symptoms are weak and manageable. However, if the introduction of devices is well before learning the mother tongue, and through the mother tongue, as much of the world as possible, having P2, perhaps the only certainty is that for this generation, the everyday role of digital devices is not perceived as tool or instrument to augment life, but as a normative and necessary means to interact with the world. This chief characteristic has important developmental implications, most notably in the construction of identity and social, emotional learning. Still, there are some research findings that suggest that Generation Alpha can be distinguished from previous generations. Leslie's comments, it is the second step in which the digital devices are already organic parts of their life. In the first step, before the devices were introduced, was when they lived a full and happy life without the devices. The time of introducing the devices is crucial. If they know the mother tongue, and they have learned as much of the world as possible, the introduction of the devices adds to the quality of life. The device is a means to an end, and the end is life itself. There are no withdrawal symptoms here, or the withdrawal symptoms are weak and manageable. However, if the introduction of devices is well before learning the mother tongue, and through the mother tongue, as much of the world as possible, having or not having the devices will decide on the quality of life, and that is why they simply cannot live without them. Having the device has become the end, and withdrawal symptoms are very strong. P2, in a rare study comparing generational differences, Apidin and Kaya identified characteristics of Generation Alpha from the perspective of pre-school teachers. Using a qualitative design with a small sample, n equals 12, they found Generation Alpha to exhibit behaviors such as being more curious, free from any rules, being more ill-tempered, more mobile and more self-centered than Generation Z. Moreover, they also had high self-esteem, and they were more emotional and more conscious. In terms of communication, Generation Alpha was determined to be more closed and behave more individually than Generation Z. Considering classroom management techniques, pre-school teachers were found to use the reconstructive approach for the Alpha generation and traditional classroom management techniques for Generation Z. Leslie's comments, I agree with this description, although a lot depends on the type of teacher and the type of teaching. P3. The use of social media through mobile devices is a chief characteristic of Generation Alpha. The continuous rise in mobile internet use of Generation Alpha is blurring traditional boundaries between news, information, entertainment, socializing and research. Leslie's comments: I know it from members of the Alpha generation that they don't really bother about news, they are more often fishing for sensational, or record-breaking bits or gossip. Information is important if it doesn't smell learning. Entertainment is important, especially if it is strongly suggested by influencers. I have never met a member of the Alpha generation who used the internet and the social media for research. P3. Over 80% of parents of Generation Alpha say their children watch videos or play games on a mobile device daily and on average spend 7 to 8 hours on screen. As early as kindergarten, children's individual consumption of digitally streamed movies drives the classroom social interaction. Leslie's comments: I wonder where these kids find 7 to 8 hours day after day for videos and games. Isn't that time missing from learning, from homework, from playing alone or with mates, or with the family? From sport and keeping fit, from learning music, art and drama, or from talking to parents, siblings and relatives? P3. There are ongoing concerns that the rise in interpersonal communication through text will result in a loss of oral communication skills and that a reliance upon social media influencers to learn about current events will result in less critical thinking. Leslie's comments: interpersonal communication skills through texting pushes back the listening skills and oral skills, and the result is often a sort of gullah language with distorted grammar and reduced vocabulary. If the youngsters get used to that, it will be very difficult to perform well in academic studies. P3. The increased use of technology has resulted in a decline in opportunities for social, emotional development. Moreover, the increased use of social media has led to an increase in mental health problems as children who spend more time on screens experience more mental health challenges. The potential good news is that Generation Alpha are children born to late millennials or members of Generation Z. The parents often spend more time and are more engaged with their children's lives. Thus, parents and other adults may be able to mediate harmful effects of social media use. Leslie's comments: I have mixed feelings here. The more a parent is engaged in using the internet and the social media, the less attention they could give to their children, and more readily drive the baby and the child into using the internet and the social media to buy time for their own drives. P3. In a rare study of adult-child interaction with 100 parents and children, Moriarty et al. Found that when social media and online games are introduced into the child's environment, it has been demonstrated that they mediate their conceptualization of learning and cognitive development. Through the interactions between teachers, children, and technology, children conceptualize higher mental functions such as continuous and ongoing problem-solving dispositions, as well as language acquisition and social learning. Leslie's comments: It is possible, i.e. It is not impossible, in a TESOL teaching English as a second language, in countries where English is spoken as a mother tongue environment, but it is impossible in a TEFL teaching English as a foreign language environment. P3. There is widespread concern for the social, emotional and mental health of Generation Alpha and role of teachers and parents. In Slovakia, there is concern for the lack of emotional intelligence in Generation Alpha. In Romania, based on the results of a previous investigation carried out in the same location during the period of 2015 to 2016, exploratory qualitative research concluded that young children in Romania have a low level of digital literacy due to their parents' and educators' lack of technology knowledge and skills. Additionally, issues like online privacy and security are rarely of adults' concern. Parents worry more about their children's eyesight and isolation. Leslie's comments: Concern is a feeling, not an action. I wonder what they learned and what they did with their concern. The papers don't report on any action. P4. In Indonesia, Zulkifli et al. Note the results of the study from 25 kindergarten participants indicate that the role of preschools in the use of gadgets in digital native generation children in Pekanbaru City is included in the low category. Only a few preschools have organized parenting education for parents. There are almost no rules governing children's use of gadgets at home, and few preschools educate children on how to use gadgets properly. It is expected for teachers and preschools to add special programs in the curriculum to provide information about positive gadget use and parenting programs that discuss digital native generation and collaborate with parents to establish rules such as frequency, duration, and content of children using gadgets. Leslie's comments: these parents must have thought that the gadgets are the 21st century equivalents of Lego, and see no evil, hear no evil and smell no evil. It is alarming, however, that besides frequency and duration, they do not mention the age of introduction. P4, in Malaysia, Fadzil et al. Concluded the study showed that more than half of the respondents, parents and kids, surveyed felt very dependent upon gadgets. Parents need them as kids control, while kids need them for pleasure and entertainment tools. They feel the need to have their phones on them 24 hours or use their phones every day. This will have caused them to feel anxious, disconnected, or even upset if they did not use and utilize it in their future and daily life. Leslie's comments: it proves my point that babies and kids' dependency mostly originates from, and boosted by, the too early, and aimless, introduction of gadgets by dependent parents. I wonder what will happen to the Gamma Gen and the Delta Gen, who will be parented by the Alpha Gen. Will they get the gadget in the placenta, so as not to be late, or miss out on something vital? It is a poetic question. I didn't mean to give a tip to future developers. P4, finally, in Russia, experts found that preschool children with prolonged immersion in virtual leisure and limited social contacts with other people contribute to decrease in the level of self-esteem and increase in the level of anxiety and social distancing from parents. Leslie's comments: I wonder what they have learned from it, and what they have done about it. It is missing from the report. P4, this review synthesizes the research literature on what has been learned so far and seeks to accomplish the following goals. 1. Identify the roles of teachers in the education of Generation Alpha. 2. Identify novel educational strategies in the teaching of Generation Alpha. And 3. Identify the roles blended and hybrid learning played in the education of Generation Alpha. There is a growing body of literature focused on answering the question, what is known about learning practices of Generation Alpha? Leslie's comments: these are very similar to the original goals of the review. My questions are also similar. 1. Are the teachers trained to teach the members of the Alpha Gen? I'm only asking because teachers were hardly ever trained to teach the LD students, and the tasks here are even more daunting. 2. Do the educational strategies focus on avoiding dependency, on loss of memory, on loss of willingness to memorize anything? I'm only asking because these are the most important traits I, as a teacher in teaching members of the Alpha Gen, experienced. 3. Are the teachers trained in blended teaching? Are the students trained in blended learning? What do teachers blend in their teaching? What do students blend in their learning? What is known about the education of Generation Alpha? Do researchers know that gadgets are neither the root of all evil, nor the solution to all the world's problems? They are useful if they are introduced well and at a good time, and they are deadly if they are not. P9. If Generation Alpha is special, then the expectation is that teachers would be the first to be impacted by the need for innovative teaching strategies. A synthesis of the 18 studies that focused on the teachers confirms the gradual impact of an increased technology expertise needed to teach Generation Alpha. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the research tells a story of how teachers struggle to keep up with technology, recognize the importance of staying updated, and innovate to teach Generation Alpha. To tell this story, 7 publications were from Asia, 5 publications were from Europe, 3 from the United States, 2 from the Middle East, and 1 from Brazil. Leslie's comments: the number of publications cannot tell how important the topic is in a certain region, and doesn't tell how close their authors are to the solution to the problem, if we cannot define exactly what the problem is. p9. For teachers, and most others, the speed of technological advances generally outpaces the ability to stay current on the latest educational innovations. The gap between teachers' and students' digital competence is dependent upon both teacher training and teacher commitment to staying updated. Leslie's comments: technological advances are rarely about, and seldom to serve, educational innovations. The meeting of the two, if we are lucky and associate well, may serve education, but they are more often unlucky, if we don't think ahead about some serious consequences affecting our children. It takes a long time to embed the new developments into teacher training, and a great deal more to be able to use them in the classroom. Technology should be used to improve people's life, rather than using people to make technology busy. p9. Regarding teacher training, a study conducted by Galindo, Dominguez and Bezanilla showed only a medium level of digital competence among 200 future teachers enrolled in educational degrees in universities in Spain. Once in the classroom, whether or not teachers use social media may depend on attitudes towards its usefulness. Leslie's comments: a more developed digital competence cannot give a better pedagogical aim to the teacher and to the class. A bad teacher and a bad class cannot be made good just by using more technology, but a good teacher and a good class can be made even better by using them well, with the proper aim, and at a good time. p9. In a dissertation, Turnbull explored the reasons for the low integration of social media in higher education classroom assignments in the United States. Professors who integrated social media into assignments believed that social media is an important part of students' present lives and future employability. Professors who did not integrate social media into assignments believed that social media is not relevant to their class and not useful for learning. These professors were also older and unfamiliar with social media. Leslie's comments: if it is like that, there may be many reasons behind it. One is that many universities still have a feudalistic structure with very rigid hierarchies. Another is that in many universities, dominant figures still look down onto the world from the window of an ivory tower. The tower is always right, there is no room for talking back. Yet another is that using or not using the social media may be the reflection of the mixture of generation gap and opinion gap. It is like choosing one party or another in politics. p10. Similarly, Adnan et al. Investigated teachers' content development utilizing innovative teaching and learning technologies among tertiary teachers in Malaysia. The results showed that after training, very few teachers created innovative learning materials, e.g. virtual reality, on their own. The results affirm the necessity of offering opportunities for teachers to master new digital technologies throughout their careers. Leslie's comments: even if your concept is crystal clear and working well orally, on paper, or on the board, it may take a long time to be able to put it on the screen. Some of these teachers may still have been in their incubation period, i.e. halfway through between the input and the output, at the time of this report. p10. In educational institutions around the world, there is a growing acknowledgement that teacher training needs to be responsive to the assumed growing digital divide between teachers and students. Leslie's comments: okay, but what does the growing digital divide between teachers and students mean? Do students beat their teachers in understanding and learning academically assessed subjects with the help of the internet, gadgets, and AI, or any student can beat all the teaching staff hands down in Minecraft? p10. In Brazil, future teachers were able to identify Generation Alpha's use and ease with digital technologies but also recognized that their courses did not sufficiently prepare them to teach the new generation. Similarly, future teachers in the Czech Republic believed that information and communication technology could support classes such as mathematics and elementary science but reported that for their own learning, they prefer textbooks and notes from lectures rather than the internet. Finally, Aditya et al. Found that although early childhood education teachers in Indonesia had positive attitudes toward the use of information and communication technology, the lack of technical support and training led to difficulties with integrating technology in their own activities. Leslie's comments: from all three examples, my conclusion is that assessing technological literacy alone doesn't make sense in itself. Parallelly, we must assess classical literacy, i.e. auditive skills such as listening and speaking, as well as literacy skills such as reading and writing, and for both, mental arithmetic. For teacher trainees, we need to know this to learn the best use of technology on top of classical literacy. The use of technology is an attempt to extend human skills. If we don't know enough about these skills, any attempt to extend them is a waste of time. For students, we need to know this to learn what we extend by technology. We can only teach students where they are. If we don't know where they are, any attempt to teach them is a waste of time. P10, even if proper teacher training is possible, how to train teachers is an important challenge. Leslie's comments: teaching is a helping profession, and with the use of technology, it has become more so. Technology can speed up the manipulation, but it cannot directly help understanding. For this, we need the help of a human, and the humanistic, or person-centered approach is often great help. P10, can the presence of older, more experienced teachers from other generations make a difference? Leslie's comments: yes, but the difference can be either positive or negative. If the different generation doesn't mean generation gap as well as opinion gap, it can be great help, and the earlier generation with a deeper insight can speed up accommodation and assimilation. If, however, the earlier generation represents the good old way, the proved path, they may be a block in development. As an example, universities teach how to teach English through English. If some old foxes suggest that this is the way we do it, the whole trade can go back to the good old translation method, that was last modern at the time of the dinosaurs. P11, teachers have been innovating and experimenting with new teaching methods for Generation Alpha with mixed success. Leslie's comments: I can only guess that the innovations and experiments were not based on a deep knowledge of the existing skills to base the innovations and the experiments on. P11, in another effort to improve Generation Alpha's reading skills, Obersek and Kerniza examined Slovenian primary teachers' attitudes towards an internet reciprocal teaching IRT method that aims to improve students' functional literacy competence when using the internet and screens. Research with previous generations suggested that paper-based reading produced better learning outcomes than screen-based reading. Leslie's comments: I don't really want to comment on this because I don't know enough about the nuanced details. P11, there was an acknowledgement that there was no going back to paper-based reading. Leslie's comments: paper-based reading is not necessarily going back, and screen-based reading is not necessarily the way ahead. The focus should be reading comprehension both for paper-based and for screen-based reading. P11, games and robots are also making inroads into Generation Alpha curriculums. Teachers believed that although there are many educational benefits, the usage of games could lead to physical health problems, communication problems, focusing problems, mental disorder, and excessive time loss. Leslie's comments: games will not make a boring lesson exciting, a chaotic lesson understandable, or an unprepared lesson reach its conclusions. Games must make the comprehension deeper, the insight more linked to existing knowledge, and the content more emotionally loaded for long-term memory. P11, in summary, experimentation with novel approaches has some promising results, but there is no single innovation that has been replicated or scaled to an extent to be seen as universally effective. Leslie's comments: in my field, TESOL teaching English for speakers of other languages, we first have to learn the student before we attempt to teach them. The decision on which novel approach to choose to add will depend on a very deep knowledge of what the student knows, what they don't know, and what they need. P11 to 12, in some countries, researchers are discovering how best to train teachers at national level. In Croatia, Jukic and Skojo conducted interviews with 10 information and communication technology ICT experts and 10 university professors to assess the future and integration of technology. Reflecting their orientation, the ICT experts perceived that teachers have insufficient training, their computer literacy is lower than students, and schools do not have adequate equipment. According to the ICT experts, teaching must be more dynamic and should be gamified as future occupations will be related to highly developed technology and artificial intelligence. Leslie's comments, I wonder how much overlap there was between the ICT experts and the professors' knowledge of the students. I only have a wild guess that it was quite little. Gamification is fine, as long as it doesn't aim at quantifying the unquantifiable and if it has a very clear aim of better understanding. However, if education is made more game-like, games must also be made more educational. p12. The professors raised concerns about challenges associated with insufficient social interactions, problems of socialization, and insufficient development of social competencies and communication skills. In other words, social, emotional learning was important. The professors also agreed that the teaching process must be updated to be more interesting, teaching methods need to be multimodal with visualization of the teaching content, the teaching process must be more dynamic with active learning and interactive teaching, and the curriculum must be attractive with elective subjects. Leslie's comments, all the aims above describe a learning society with no solid walls between subjects and departments, and even the borders between teaching institutions should be airy. In teaching, the dialogue mode should be universal, and the drive behind learning should be curiosity rather than anger and fright. Social and emotional skills develop fast in a warm, welcoming and accepting society. p12. In summary, although a few articles depict efforts to understand how best to evaluate Generation Alpha, the results have not yet translated into national policies. Leslie's comments, the Alpha generation is not a monolithic block, as varied as the members of the generation. That is the reason why it is impossible to find a uniform way for improvement. p12. An important goal in many educational systems is to improve language proficiency of non-native speakers, and there has been some success with new programs aimed at increasing language proficiency for Generation Alpha. Leslie's comments, it is a very important point, but the positive examples are few and far between. If you divide all the school subjects into forgettable subjects, i.e. subjects you have learned but will forget by the time you start a career, and remembered subjects, i.e. subjects you have learned and will need in your career, learning a foreign language is more important than the forgettable subjects altogether. In spite of this, teaching and learning foreign languages have been notoriously ineffective in most countries, and teacher selection and teacher training have not developed fast enough to fill the need. Not surprisingly, quite a few students try to avoid language learning and find solutions to their language needs in AI. p12, for example, Kadir et al. Examined the effectiveness of a 3-year foreign language program of Arabic, English, Japanese in 3 Indonesian schools. The language program implemented smart and creative learning methodologies with audio and visual gadgets. The findings revealed that the program created engaging and enjoyable learning environment for students. Leslie's comments, this must be one of the few positive examples, and the use of audio, visual devices may make them more effective. p12, also in Indonesia, Rombat et al. Developed a blended learning model for foreign speakers that gave the students the opportunity to repeatedly read the text and ultimately improved Indonesian reading skills. Leslie's comments, I wonder how it can be integrated with auditory, listening and speaking skills, to make the language learning skills fully communicative. p12, finally, Shamir et al. Explored the effectiveness of the Waterford Early Learning Curriculum, a game-based curriculum designed to promote English as a foreign language through reading, writing and typing among students in kindergarten through 2nd grade. The results showed that students that used the curriculum had significantly higher scores than students who did not use the curriculum. Leslie's comments, it seems that they leave out the oracy skills, the listening and speaking. I wonder how their students will speak English, since, as we know, there is no avenue from the literacy skills towards the oracy skills. It is especially true if the writing skill is reinforced by typing. The method may work with other languages, but written English is a transmutant language while spoken English is a mutant language, and the distance between them is too big for any program to overbridge. P12, in summary, as more language curriculums innovate to take advantage of technology, there will likely be an increase of research that capitalizes on Generation Alpha's presumed digital competence. Leslie's comments, okay, but language is primarily speech, that is why we call it a tongue, and it will be very difficult later to learn to speak. P14, the review of blended/online learning for Generation Alpha is a subset for a far greater research literature on teaching modalities. The literature review directly related to Generation Alpha produced 10 studies that examined online and blended learning. 5 studies were conducted in Asia, 2 studies in Europe, 1 study in the United States, and 2 studies in the Middle East. The findings of the articles are best synthesized and sorted into categories describing the importance of experienced teachers and parents in improving experiences with Generation Alpha and describing some successes and some challenges with adopting distance and blended learning. Leslie's comments, it is a very interesting, but also a very controversial topic since the definition of blended is defined differently. In some countries blended and online are synonyms. P16, despite frequent use of the term Generation Alpha in research literature, relatively few studies report generational differences that reveal how children of this generation are characteristically different from previous generations. There is only a strong assumption that Generation Alpha is different. A major worldwide concern is that the use of technology by Generation Alpha has decreased opportunities for social, emotional development and increased mental health problems. Where research has been conducted, the underlying goal is to discover how educational practices may benefit with parents and adults mediating technology use. Leslie's comments, in my opinion, the most important difference between Generation Y and Z and Generation Alpha is that they are different and similar at the same time. They are similar, because they are all infected by technology, but they are also different because technology acted upon them differently. Generations Y and Z learnt the mother tongue, many of the behavioral extras, and some, not all, empathy by the time they met technology. Technology left much of the previously learned elements intact and created a positive synergy with them. Generation Alpha, on the other hand, met technology somewhat before, or at times well before they managed to acquire the mother tongue and the extras, and technology blocked the acquisition of all these. Because of this, the synergy is negative, and we, teachers may feel it on the teachability, and on the memorizing habits of the Alpha Gen. P16, most of the research literature assumes differences between Generation Alpha and previous generations without systematic observation. An open question is how Generation Alpha is qualitatively different from previous generations. Therefore, future research should utilize theoretical frameworks to identify and understand the unique characteristics, behaviors, and traits of the digital native Generation Alpha. Leslie's comments, it is a very controversial topic, because the definitions are not clear. Generation for researchers, who make their statistics based on different traits, the organizing principle is who was born when, although a difference in the time of birth doesn't change any one of the traits. I, as a teacher, feel the traits, with their positive or negative alterations, independently from the student's dates of birth. Understanding Generation Alpha, characteristics, trends, and their impact on the future. Lloyd Pilapil March 2025 Pixel Mojo Corporation Manila, Philippines P1, born in and after 2010, the eldest Generation Alpha is still in their school years and has already influenced decisions related to marketing, technology, and priorities of their millennial parents. There is a dearth of study exploring the different facets of Generation Alpha, and to this end, the present paper attempts to unravel, contextualize, and understand Generation Alpha within the ecology of the 21st century world. Leslie's comments: there are really quite a lot of study materials around, but very few of these are really about the distinctive features of the alpha gen. Most of them contain a loop definition. Alpha generation is like that, identifying the traits for the generation. They are like that because they are alpha generation, identifying the generation by the traits. The cause and the effect change places. It is very useful for parents and other care givers to avoid responsibility. People link the traits to the generation, i.e. to the time of birth, rather than to the action that produced the trait, i.e. to introducing gadgets too early and without any aim. P1, in spite of being the wealthiest, diverse, and tech-savvy generation, it was revealed that the growing preference toward hedonism and small family, changing nature of their parents' jobs and workplace, the overarching and decisive influence of technologies in nearly all the developmental aspects of their life, make them vulnerable to psychological and developmental concerns. Leslie's comments: newborn babies are not hedonists, they are egotists. They don't prefer a small family, babies don't prefer any size of a family, their parents do. P1, the paper envisages a promising future for Generation Alpha, but with caveats, requiring timely interventions from the caregivers and school authorities. Leslie's comments: the timely interventions are necessary to avoid and to mend the problems teachers experience in teaching members of the Alpha Gen. P3, timeline for the 20th and 21st generations, GIs, General Issues, 1901 to 1924, Silence 1925 to 1945, Baby Boomers 1946 to 1964, Generation X 1865 to 1980, Generation Y/Millennials 1981 to 1996, Generation Z/iGens 1997 to 2010, Generation Alpha 2010 to 2025. Leslie's comments: as a baby boomer, I've been teaching members of all these generations and I have a direct experience about their learning. The differences can be better understood by their teachability than their date of birth. P3, born to their millennials parents, Generation Alpha are considered to be born between 2010 and 2025. Their birth year, 2010, coincided with the year where app was the word of the year and witnessed the launch of iPad and Instagram, presently the world's most preferred brand and social media application, respectively. Leslie's comments: the characteristic features of a member of a generation doesn't depend on the date of birth, and it doesn't depend on any new technologies at the time of their birth. These features only depend on what happened to them at birth and after their birth, i.e. what their caregivers understood by care. P3 to 4, they are born in an era of rapid advanced technologies operating 24*7*365 globally. Technology means world to them. From entertainment, gaming, connecting to peers, and even education in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic, their life revolves around technology. Recently it was found that by the age of 2, Generation Alpha master touchscreen and easily navigate through various apps on smartphones, which their predecessors took years, earning them the labels of Generation Glass, Screenagers, Digital Natives, or Wired Generation. Leslie's comments: there is a very serious misunderstanding here. New technologies are not invented and developed for babies born at the time of the invention or development. They are invented by, and they are invented for responsible adults. These adults know what they can do with the gadget, and they must also know, better put, they should also know, what the gadget can do to them or to their children. The A-bomb was invented and developed from 1942 to 1945. In my nuclear family, I have 3 siblings who were born in 1942, in 1943, and in 1945. I'm so happy that my parents were responsible, and gave my brother and 2 sisters a teddy bear, a hula hoop, and a yo-yo, instead of the new invention. P4, For understanding the psychological traits of Gen Alpha, it is imperative to understand their ecology of birth, which will give a holistic sense of their generation locality. Gen Alpha is in a real sense the first millennium generation compared to their elders. Life in the millennium world is quite different to that of pre-millennium age. From lifestyle, patterns of relationships, nature of jobs, gender roles, both the personal and professional life have changed drastically. Leslie's comments, all these factors, and maybe more, should make a newlywed couple think twice before they have a child. These factors are not good enough alibis to neglect the child because of them, to give up the mother, tongue, teaching role of the child for them, and to appoint a gadget to take care of the child. P4, tele, work, flexi, time, work from home or remote working, working in shifts and rise in dual career families have blurred the boundaries separating personal and professional life for millennials, impacting Gen Alpha. Compared to their elders, Gen Alpha are living in a different technology-driven reality, which may wreak havoc for their future life. Leslie's comments, these factors describe the conditions in which the parents neglect their child, but they don't give the moral right for them to do it. Child care and teaching the mother tongue 24*7*365. Job for at least 3 years and a part-time job for a further 4-year period. It is a very important, and, I guess, a very hard decision to make. P4, psychoanalysts and developmental psychologists with the likes of Bowlby, Freud, and Piaget underscore the prominence of early days of life for a secure attachment, cognitive and social development leading to a strong, stable, and adaptive personality in future. Freud, 1923, stresses upon the indispensable role of childhood and parenting for a stronger ego to emerge, free from anxieties, vulnerabilities, and conflicts. Leslie's comments, if you don't know these and you mistreat your child, it is a mistake, and you have to learn from it and you have to correct it. However, if you know these and you still mistreat your child, it is a sin, you have to stop doing it, you have to learn from it, and you have to ask a professional helper to help you correct it. P5, they, I.e. The Alpha Gen, are a gift to their stressed out millennial parents, who prefer a small family with growing preference toward a one-baby family. Subsequently, they are the most pampered and wealthiest in terms of materialistic possessions and gadgets, making them an instant gratification seeker, selfish and overindulgent cohort. Leslie's comments, egotism is inborn for babies and it is still there in early childhood. Being pampered is the result of a misunderstood love. Getting all gadgets means that the parents cannot make the difference between wants and needs. In a good case, babies should never get the gadgets since they don't need them, they cannot do anything meaningful with them, and they have other, more important jobs to attend to. Kids may get some of the gadgets after a very strict needs analysis. The gadgets must never interfere with the learning of the mother tongue, and such extras as learning the body language, learning good manners, learning the other language kids have to use when they address adults and strangers, learning some of the elements of social intelligence and emotional intelligence, and learning empathy. Enlightened parents recognize kids' wants, appreciate kids' wants, and serve their needs. P5-6, Mannheim, 1952, suggested the term generational location for the problem subjective to every generation and unique to every cohort belonging to a specific historical period of time. Generation Alpha bears no exception. Compared to their predecessors, they are born in a time when the world was recovering from the global financial crisis, new avenues of digital technologies and social media were up to penetrate the whole world, change in family structures, never-ending climate change debate, among others with the recent COVID-19 pandemic in the list. Leslie's comments, they seriously think that the date of birth changes the characteristic features of people, that new digital technologies were invented and developed for the Alpha generation, and that a child can get the gadgets independently from the parents. The date of birth doesn't change any features, the digital impact does. New technologies are invented and developed by the parents' generation, for the parents' generation, and misused or abused by the parents' generation, by giving them to the kids too early and without aims. P6, for Gen Alpha, vulnerabilities emerging out of digital technologies are second to none. From psychological and physiological impact including cognition, sleep, and impaired social and emotional well-being, to cyber threats and addiction, the list is ever growing. Gen Alpha started connecting more with Alexa or Siri, voice box assistant of Amazon and Apple, than with their parents or friends. More than enjoying the outdoor activities or real-life play, they hop upon mobile games like PUBG, Xbox, and Pokemon, within their comfort zone inside home. Leslie's comments, this is a long, and probably not a full, list of the threats looming over the head of Alpha Gen. I wonder how long another list would be that shows the actions that stop the threats and heal the wounds. P6, such has been the widespread use of online gaming that American Psychiatric Association and World Health Organization have classified them as disorders, namely Internet gaming disorders and gaming disorders, respectively. In one of our study we found that an adolescent spent an average of 2 hours on mobile gaming with sheer consequences on anger management and socialization, leading to loneliness and aggressiveness upon withdrawal. Leslie's comments, gaming disorders usually need a combined and concerted action by parents, teachers, schools, psychologists, psychiatrists, and professional helpers. If a gamer comes into my class, they are usually late, dead tired, as if they had just finished the second shift of hard physical work. Their concentration span is extremely short, and their concentration curve follows a saw-tooth pattern, i.e. a relatively high but very short upturn, a deep dive down to almost zero, and a relatively long sleeping period. In such a state the lesson doesn't make much sense, because even if they learn something, they forget it almost immediately. With proper cooperation with the parents, they can sometimes come to class in a relatively clean state, and that is when we have to learn something that leads to a strong aha, or eureka feeling, that proves that a high level of adrenaline is also possible outside gaming. After that, a relaxed, not blaming, conversation will make them more cooperative, and they may take the first step towards help. I personally follow the humanistic person-centered approach in helping, and I have a collection of notoriously unlearned, misunderstood, or frightening topics as the content. P6, physiologically and psychologically, changes in brain plasticity, or neural wirings, cognition, sleep disturbances, and obesity, continues the future problematic trend for Gen Alpha. Neural changes due to games and internet use in children are uniquely sensitive to neural plasticity. It delays the development of microstructures in the cortical brain regions and reduction of brain tissue density, leading to deficits in cognition. Leslie's comments, even this long list of ills doesn't seem to be persuasive enough for parents and other care-givers to change their practices. I wonder if they can see the link between these symptoms and problems in memorizing, association, syntax, listening comprehension, reading comprehension, pronunciation, and spelling. P6, sleep carries a major survival value for mankind, but, marred with casual attitude toward sleep followed by technology use at night. The time meant for sleep is being traded off with technology use at night, time by texting, playing games and watching movies. Leslie's comments, texting gives the false impression that we write but neither its vocabulary, nor its syntax can be used in academically accepted writing, e.g. in school assignments or at examinations. Games often give the false impression that it is possible to make the unquantifiable quantifiable and win over other gamers. You may not recognize that both of you are losers. Videos that fill the mind are, or can be useful, but the type of videos that empty the mind are useless and dangerous. They most often change the pictures so quickly that it is impossible to name them, i.e. to fit words, ideas, or even critical thoughts between them. The result is that it doesn't feed the inner monologue and its speech makes other genres, e.g. Reading or conversation, boring. P7. Using such sleep-eroding devices leads to more screen time, further elongating time exposure to blue, light-emitting diodes, leading to less production of melatonin hormone, or sleep-producing hormone, and disrupting sleep-wake cycle. Leslie's comments: these sleep-eroding devices may not make the time spent on them happy, but they definitely make learning time, or lesson time unhappy. The blue light exposure that is mentioned here doesn't mean that the screen is blue. All colors that appear on the screen are made by mixing red, blue, and green colors in different proportion, so the blue light is almost always there. P7. In the opening line of a UNICEF report on children in the digital world, Keeley, 2017, alarmingly observed the growing access and easiness of bullies, sex offenders, and traffickers in targeting their prey, here children, while staying anonymous. With the growing technology, crimes here become digital in nature too. The report categorizes 3 types of digital risks. I. Content: when a child sees any unwelcome and inappropriate content like pornographic or violent images, or any hate speech or racist material. 2. Contact: when a child comes in contact with someone seeking inappropriate behavior, and 3. Conduct: when the child does something risky. Leslie's comments: classroom bullies can be isolated and handled by a well-trained teacher and a supportive class. Cyberbullies are more difficult. Cyberbullying is a crime and a lot depends on the child's trustful relationship with the parent who has to act immediately. Filtering inappropriate content, contact, and conduct out of the child's life also depends on the trustful relationship between the child and the parent. Banning all content, contact, and conduct generally has the opposite result. P7. In a recent survey, it was found that a child spent approximately 7 to 8 hours on mobile, with the maximum time devoted to the internet, social media, gaming, and texting. They have been lured to believe that every problem has solution courtesy technology, and is available round the clock, much more than the availability of their caregivers. Technology has overpowered humans, impairing social and emotional skills, affecting relationships, which will become fatal as Alpha Gen grows up. Their immediate predecessors, Generation Z, was found to be the most vulnerable age group for suicide in the most youthful nation in the world, India. Such a worrying trend of their elders, who were either unknown to or partially exposed to technology in their initial years of life, set a wrong precedent for Gen Alpha. Leslie's comments: if the kids can use the internet 7 to 8 hours a day for the social media, gaming, and texting, isn't it the responsibility of the parents and other care-givers? Isn't that time missing from learning hobbies, learning music and other arts, and socializing? Isn't it the parents and other care-givers' responsibility if the kids believe that the internet is the solution to all the world's problems? Didn't the parents and other care-givers let or make the kids believe that the internet is a care-giver that is available round the clock, and it can replace social skills, emotional skills, and even mental skills? P8. The change in family structure, child rearing practices, the nature of the job in terms of helicopter parenting, small and nuclear family, dual career family, and work from home put an excessive toll on the parents too. Theories by Bowlby, 1973, and Freud, 1923, had explicitly emphasized the importance of healthy parenting in the first 2 years, deemed crucial for the development of a healthy attachment and relationship for child in later part of life. However, the present pattern of parenting appears to be polarized with excessive love, attention, affection, and continuous monitoring of the child on one hand, and taking the help of babysitters/maids/foster caregivers during the time when they are out on the other. Leslie's comments: when couples in the Y and Z generations opted for a small, nuclear families, they didn't count in that their privacy means loneliness for their kids if the mother doesn't give up her job, or sacrifice her career for at least 3 years to teach the mother tongue and provide the kid with a caring and sharing family. Freud, and many others since Freud, have warned about the dangers, but many parents didn't know these, or knew them but didn't care. There is also a misunderstanding or false definition here. Love, i.e. motherly love, that is unconditional positive regard, combined with fatherly love that sets aims, shows standards and requires attempts to move towards the aims and reach the standards, cannot be excessive. Pampering and blind affection can be. Helicopter parenting, i.e. knowing one-sidedly in every minute where the child is and what they do, is not true attention. True attention is caring and it needs presence. P8. The future holds bright for Gen Alpha but with alarming and persistent caveats in future. With the expanding population, rising mental health crisis, rapid advancement in technology, artificial intelligence, robotics, including humanoids, leading to job automation and employment crisis, the crisis might get mightier in the same proportion, COVID-19 being the fresh example. Leslie's comments, the problems and dangers listed above promise anything but a bright future for the Alpha Gen. For a bright future, parents, other care givers, and other adults, have to pay more attention to the kids' real needs, rather than their own comfort, or companies' profits. P8, Tickle, 2011, while referring to obsession with technology, observed that mankind have reached the robotic moment in their history when they are friendlier and caring to their devices than their fellow beings. Gen Alpha, who is already battling many technological, born issues, should be trained in the same league to detach themselves with their slavery. Ja et al. 2019, while observing the deep human, technology unification in day-to-day life, calls for a healthy and integrated approach, where both can be assimilated, for technology to stay and play the role of powerful redeemer and not a nemesis to mankind. Leslie's comments, a robotic moment doesn't, well, actually, shouldn't mean that robots will take away everybody's jobs, risking every family's livelihood, and it mustn't mean either that robots can take over care for the child and education of the child. Parents, who give a gadget to a 1-year-old baby, imagine that the gadget takes care of the child. It is false. The gadget may act as a pacifier but it cannot give care. Instead, it takes away the chance from the child to learn the mother tongue for that period of time. P9. For a robust future of Gen Alpha, millennials' parents have to play a pivotal role in their subjective, psychological, and digital well-being through timely presence and interventions. Leslie's comments, the most important is the parent's presence and it cannot be replaced by other care givers and even less by gadgets. As for the interventions, the most important is the good timing of the introduction of gadgets, and the good selection of the type of the gadgets. Both in the timing and in the selection, they must be sincere about their own relationship with different gadgets, including their own gadget dependency. P9, the American Association of Pediatrics, 2016, has recommended amount of adequate screen hours age-wise for parents to ensure that screen time doesn't consume time slated for academic and health activities. Leslie's comments, caring parents don't need to, and careless parents cannot regulate the screen hours. Many parents want to start regulating the screen hours when it is too late. P9, born in a rapid technological era, compared to their parents, Gen Alpha presents exciting combination of opportunities, adventure, and explorations for the future. Driven socially, Gen Alpha share their life and thoughts publicly and knows no boundaries. They will presumably grow up being creative and unconventional. Given the zeitgeist in prospect, probably, the need for achievement, autonomy, and recognition, along with competitiveness, narcissism, ambiguity, intolerance, impulsivity, attention seeking, and risk-taking behavior will probably predominate and become salient in Gen Alpha with the passage of time. With proper parenting and guidance, the prerequisite is to install in them the right virtues and values, which are in line with the societal and traditional ethos. It is essential to inculcate in them the essence of being human, managing emotions, forming stable relationships, and a healthy assimilation with technology in daily life. With the right mix of outdoor activities including play and forest bathing, regulated use of technology, authoritative parenting, education and instilling the 21st century skills namely adaptability, curiosity, critical thinking, persistence, teaming, social, and cultural awareness, World Economic Forum, 2016, will go long in shaping them to be an asset for family, society, country, and the world in future. Leslie's comments: members of Generation Alpha were born in the technological era, but it doesn't mean that the new inventions and developments were invented and developed for them at the time of their birth. The fact that a 1-year-old baby can push a button or touch a screen doesn't mean that they can push a button or touch a screen with an aim and a meaning. Without, or before, an aim and a meaning, these are neither opportunities, nor adventures, nor explorations, and especially not a combination of the three. And we mustn't forget either that the age of 1 year is well before a baby has finished learning the mother tongue. We must conclude that giving a gadget to a 1-year-old baby is a brutal intervention against their education, health, and well-being. As a conclusion, we can sum up what we know so far: babies, who were born between January 1, 2010 and December 31, 2024 were not born as members of the Alpha Gen. Nobody was, and nobody has been born as members of the Alpha Gen. Everybody was born as a member of the human race, and gradually, slowly but surely, has become a member of the Alpha Gen. The speed and the extent depends on the intervention of technology on learning and development. I don't want to give advice to anyone, so I address some positive and negative imperatives to myself. I mustn't give any one of the gadgets to the baby since they cannot do anything that has an aim and a meaning with them. The baby and the child's most important job, till at least the age of 3, is to learn the mother tongue. Anybody and anything that interferes with this learning acts against the best interests of the baby and the child. At around the age of 3, it is possible to give an aim and a meaning to the child's learning by adding a gadget to the nurture-nature complex on the side of nurture, and the gadget must have a sound. Learning the mother tongue is all sound with explanatory/demonstrating pictures, and we mustn't take the sound away. The gadget can consolidate or further practice whatever the child knows already, and it may prepare the next stage. The mother must know everything the gadget gives inside out to be able to build on it. If the gadget is a video, it must have a sound. The change of the frames must be slow enough to fit words with their repetition between the frames. We mustn't show videos where the change of the frames is so quick that neither words, nor thoughts, nor critical thoughts would fit between the frames. These fast videos would speed up the child's inner speed, i.e. their expectation for a change, so much that reading, that comes later, would feel too slow to enjoy, in other words boring. From 3 to 7, kids learn, besides the language, body language, both to read it and to produce it, intonation, stress, speed, voice, range, volume, speed, and these can be helped by audio and video materials. They also have to learn social skills, emotional skills, and empathy, but these are best practiced with the parents and siblings. For social skills, it is especially important to learn greeting and small talk, and these are also best practiced within the family. Over 7, the kid's education is mostly taken over by teachers and by the school, and often by some mates. It is important that the kid must have enough experience to be able to distinguish between blessing and curse, so as not to be lured by any fashionable rubbish. These principles, and many more, have worked very well for the past 20-odd years with my own students. They have worked especially well with second and third generation students, i.e. with those whose parents and/or grandparents I was teaching before them. The picture is more varied with students who were brought in recently because they have had problems in school with memorizing, with learning into the short-term memory and soon forgetting almost everything within a few weeks, with listening comprehension, with reading comprehension, with spelling, with syntax, and with mental arithmetic. Help session: some suggestions